Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We're so glad to have you here. Tonight, you will experience ancient, healing Zen Buddhism, designed to guide you into the deepest peace your mind and body have ever known. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I'm going to share an extraordinary collection of Buddha's most profound teachings, woven through timeless Zen stories that hold the power to heal your restless spirit and carry you gently into restorative sleep. Each tale contains ancient wisdom that Buddhist masters have guarded for over 2,000 years, hidden insights about releasing the burdens that keep you awake, dissolving the tensions that grip your heart, and discovering the profound peace that exists beneath all struggle. These aren't simply stories to pass the time. They're carefully selected insights from enlightened teachers who unlocked the deepest secrets of mental healing and emotional freedom. The Buddha once taught, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." Over the next 3 hours, you'll discover exactly how these transformative truths can guide you into the most profound rest of your life. As we move through these remarkable teachings together, you'll feel something powerful beginning to unfold. The weight of your day will start to lift from your shoulders. The endless stream of thoughts will gradually slow and quiet. Your breathing will naturally deepen as these ancient wisdoms work their healing magic, carrying you toward the kind of peace that restores not just your body, but your entire being. So, settle in completely now. Allow yourself to be fully supported by whatever holds you. Take one deep, conscious breath with me, and as you exhale, know that you're about to receive Buddha's most healing teachings, wisdom that has been patiently waiting to bring you home to the deepest peace you've ever known. Let us now explore a story about the nature of burdens and release. High on the sacred slopes of Mount Wutai lived a hermit who spent his days cultivating a tiny patch of medicinal herbs. His life was dictated by the rising and setting of the sun, the arrival of rain, and the slow, perfect growth of his plants. He rarely spoke, but his presence was a teaching in itself. One sweltering summer morning, a young monk, burdened by his studies and the weight of many responsibilities, sought him out. The monastery below had become overwhelming, filled with endless duties, complex philosophical debates, and the constant pressure to achieve spiritual progress. He climbed the mountain path with heavy steps, his mind churning with questions and his shoulders tight with tension. He found the hermit carefully tending a small herb, gently shaking a single leaf. The morning dew caught the early sunlight, creating tiny prisms of light that danced and shimmered. "Venerable one," the monk inquired, his voice heavy with fatigue, "what do you do here? And how can one bear the immense weight of the world's suffering and one's own shortcomings?" The hermit paused his delicate work, holding up the tiny leaf he had just shaken. On its surface, a single, perfect dewdrop had shimmered before falling to the earth below. "Before I shook it," the hermit spoke, his voice raspy but clear, "the leaf carried the full weight of this dewdrop." He paused, looking directly at the monk. It was not the weight of a stone, nor a mountain, yet, for a small leaf, even a single drop can feel immense, perhaps enough to bend its fragile stem if clung to. He looked back at the now empty surface of the leaf, where tiny droplets of moisture still clung to its edges. Now, it carries nothing. The solution to the burden, young monk, is not to grow stronger to carry more, but to learn the art of allowing the burden to fall moment by moment, like the morning dew. The monk looked at the tiny leaf, then felt something shift in his own shoulders. A subtle release, as if invisible weights were falling away. He understood that the weight was not in the world itself, but in the mind's desperate clinging to what it cannot control. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. This ancient teaching illuminates the very heart of human suffering. We exhaust ourselves not from life's natural challenges, but from our refusal to let them flow through us like water through cupped hands. Why do we grip so tightly to our burdens? Zen Buddhism points to our deeply conditioned belief that we must carry everything ourselves. We accumulate responsibilities, worries, regrets, and expectations, like a traveler stuffing more and more into an already overflowing backpack. Each additional weight feels necessary, urgent, impossible to release. Consider your own life. How many mental burdens are you carrying right now that serve no practical purpose? The conversation from last week that you replay endlessly, analyzing what you should have said differently, the worry about next month's presentation that keeps you awake at night, the guilt over past mistakes that follows you like a shadow. These are dewdrops that we refuse to let fall, holding them so tightly that they become heavier than mountains. The hermit's teaching reveals a profound truth about the nature of letting go. It's not a dramatic action, but a gentle allowing. Like the morning dew that naturally evaporates with the sunrise, our burdens can dissolve when we stop energizing them with constant attention and resistance. Zen master Shunryu Suzuki taught, each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement. This playful wisdom points to the balance between accepting our current experience while remaining open to change. We don't need to become stronger to handle more burdens. We need to become wiser about which burdens are actually ours to carry. In meditation practice, we learn to observe our thoughts and emotions without immediately claiming ownership of them. A feeling of anxiety arises, but instead of thinking, I am anxious, we might notice anxiety is present. This subtle shift creates space between our essential self and the temporary experiences flowing through our awareness. The dewdrop teaches us about impermanence. Nothing lasts forever, including our most persistent worries and deepest sorrows. When we truly understand this, we can hold our experiences more lightly, knowing they will naturally transform and release when their time comes. The Buddha said, "Nothing can harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded." Our suffering multiplies not because of external circumstances, but because of how we relate to them internally. When we learn the art of mental release, letting thoughts and emotions flow through us without resistance, we discover a natural lightness that was always available. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, notice what mental dewdrops you might be carrying. Can you gently shake the leaf of your awareness, allowing unnecessary burdens to fall away naturally? Perhaps it's time to release the weight you've been carrying that was never yours to bear. As the Buddha taught, let go or be dragged. In the gentle art of release, we find not emptiness, but the spaciousness to receive life's actual gifts. Our next story reveals the profound wisdom hidden within patient waiting. Young monk Dao Shen had developed a peculiar practice that puzzled everyone in the monastery. Every morning at dawn, he would approach his master's chamber with deliberate steps and bow respectfully. Every morning, his master would look up from his meditation cushion, study the young monk's eager face for a long moment, then wave his hand dismissively and say, "Not today." This ritual continued unchanged for 3 years. The other students began to mock Daoshen behind his back. "Why do you keep asking when you know he'll refuse?" they would whisper in the dining hall. "You're wasting your time. The master clearly has no interest in teaching you." Daoshen would smile peacefully at their criticism. "I'm not collecting answers," he would reply. "I'm collecting refusals." This response only deepened their confusion. What possible value could there be in accumulating rejections? Some thought he had lost his mind. Others believed he was being stubborn to the point of foolishness. But Daoshen continued his daily practice with unwavering consistency, approaching his master each morning with the same respectful bow, receiving the same gentle dismissal, and walking away with apparent contentment. As seasons changed and years passed, something subtle began to shift in Daoshen's presence. His eagerness transformed into patient readiness. His anticipation dissolved into simple presence. He no longer approached his master with questions burning in his mind, but with an empty cup waiting to be filled. On the morning of the 1000th refusal, something extraordinary happened. Daoshen approached his master as usual, but before he could open his mouth to speak, the master looked up and said, "Today I will answer your question." Daoshen bowed deeply and said with complete sincerity, "Thank you, master, but I no longer have a question." The master's laughter echoed through the monastery halls, so joyful and free that even the kitchen cats stopped their hunting to listen. "Then you have learned what I've been teaching you all along." "What is that, master?" The art of holding space for an answer without demanding it arrive. The art of being ready without grasping readiness. Your 1000 refusals have carved out a perfect hollowness in you. Now wisdom has room to enter naturally, like water finding a well. As the Buddha observed, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. The deeper teaching here shows us how our relationship to waiting and receptivity shapes our capacity for genuine learning. Why do we struggle so deeply with patient receptivity? Modern life conditions us to expect immediate results. We want instant answers, quick fixes, and rapid progress. This mindset, when applied to spiritual development, creates a fundamental obstacle. Wisdom cannot be forced or demanded. It can only be received when we have created the proper conditions for its arrival. Daoshen's practice reveals the difference between passive waiting and active preparation. He wasn't simply enduring rejection. He was using each refusal as an opportunity to deepen his patience, humility, and openness. With each "not today," he released another layer of expectation and entitlement. Consider how often we approach learning with hidden agendas. We read spiritual books, hoping to find the one insight that will solve all our problems. We attend meditation retreats, expecting dramatic breakthroughs. We seek teachers, anticipating they will hand us ready-made wisdom. This consumer mentality turns us into spiritual shoppers rather than genuine students. The monastery of refusals that Daoshen attended for 3 years taught him something far more valuable than any direct teaching could have provided. He learned to find fulfillment in the process itself, rather than in achieving a particular outcome. He discovered that the quality of our seeking is more important than what we think we're seeking. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." Dao Shen's 1,000 refusals gradually emptied him of expertise, expectations, and preconceptions, returning him to the fertile ground of beginner's mind. This emptiness is not vacancy, but spaciousness. Like a bowl that can only be filled when it's empty, our minds can only receive genuine wisdom when we've released our assumptions about what that wisdom should look like, or when it should arrive. The Master's final teaching points to a profound paradox. The moment we stop grasping for something is often the moment it becomes available to us. Dao Shen received his answer precisely when he no longer needed to possess it. He had learned to be content with not knowing, which created the perfect conditions for true understanding. The Buddha said, "Three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth." Truth reveals itself in its own time, according to its own wisdom. Our job is not to force its arrival, but to maintain the quality of awareness that allows us to recognize it when it appears. Tonight, as you consider the questions that burn most urgently in your heart, can you hold them with patient openness rather than desperate grasping? Perhaps the answer you seek is already forming in the space of your not knowing. As the Buddha taught, drop by drop is the water pot filled. In the gentle practice of patient receptivity, we prepare ourselves to receive the wisdom that cannot be stolen, only given freely. Let us now turn to a tale about recognizing wisdom in unexpected forms. In Master Yunmen's monastery, there sat an old meditation cushion that had supported countless hours of practice for over 200 years. The fabric was faded from deep burgundy to a mottled brown, stuffed with buckwheat hulls that had compressed into an uneven, lumpy surface. It had been mended so many times that patches covered patches, creating a patchwork map of decades. Yet the Master refused all offers to replace it. One autumn day, a wealthy businessman arrived at the monastery, hoping to make a substantial donation. He had recently begun studying meditation and felt grateful for the peace it brought to his stressed life. As he toured the meditation hall, his eyes fell upon the shabby cushion with horror. "Master Yunmen," he said, trying to hide his embarrassment, "surely you deserve better than this. Please, let me buy you a beautiful new meditation cushion, silk brocade, perfectly round, filled with the finest organic buckwheat hulls. It would be my honor to contribute something worthy of your practice." Master Yunmen settled onto the worn cushion with obvious affection, his body conforming perfectly to its familiar contours. "This cushion is already enlightened," he replied with a gentle smile. "It would be cruel to replace it now, just when it has achieved such perfect understanding." The businessman laughed uncomfortably. "Master, surely you jest. A cushion cannot become enlightened. It's just an object, an inanimate thing." "Really? Let's ask it." The Master sat quietly for a moment, his eyes closed, apparently listening to something only he could hear. Then he nodded thoughtfully and began to speak. "This cushion has supported 2,000 years of meditation, if you count all the sitting hours. It has absorbed 10,000 breaths, received countless tears of joy and frustration, and never once complained about the weight placed upon it. It has held steady through enlightenments and doubts alike." The Master stood and bowed formally to the cushion, his hands pressed together in reverence. More importantly, it has learned to be completely present for whatever sits upon it. Anxious students, peaceful masters, confused visitors, welcoming all with the same steady, unconditional support. If that isn't enlightenment, what is? The businessman stared at the cushion with new eyes, seeing it not as a shabby object, but as a teacher that had mastered the art of selfless service. The worn fabric told stories of countless seekers who had found peace in its embrace. The patches spoke of a community that cherished continuity over appearance. "But how can an inanimate object teach us anything?" he asked, his voice softer now. "By demonstrating the very qualities we seek to cultivate," the master replied. "Patience that never wavers, presence that never falters, acceptance that never judges. This cushion embodies the deepest teachings without speaking a single word." Buddha's wisdom tells us thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. What emerges from this story is how wisdom manifests through any form that embodies patience, presence, and unconditional acceptance. Why do we overlook the teachers that surround us daily? Our minds are trained to recognize wisdom only in impressive packages, famous teachers, expensive retreats, prestigious institutions. We seek extraordinary experiences, while missing the profound teachings available in ordinary objects, situations, and relationships. The enlightened cushion represents all the humble teachers in our lives that we habitually dismiss. The tree outside your window that demonstrates rootedness through every season. The pen that serves faithfully, whether writing grocery lists or love letters. The shoes that carry you wherever you need to go without complaint. Each object in our environment can become a teacher when we approach it with the right quality of attention. Consider the deeper teaching about presence and service. The cushion achieved enlightenment not through dramatic transformation, but through consistent, selfless availability. It didn't seek recognition or reward. It simply remained present, offering support to whoever needed it year after year, decade after decade. This quality of unconditional service is what Zen calls Buddha nature, the inherent capacity for awakened awareness that exists in all phenomena. When we recognize this quality in a simple meditation cushion, we begin to see it everywhere, in the coffee cup that holds our morning drink, the chair that supports our work, the earth that sustains all life. The cushion's patches tell a story about the beauty of imperfection and impermanence. In Japanese aesthetics, this quality is called wabi-sabi, finding beauty in the weathered, the worn, the imperfect. Each patch represents a moment when the community chose repair over replacement, honoring the cushion's accumulated wisdom rather than discarding it for something newer. Zen master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." The cushion had achieved this forgetting completely. It had no agenda beyond service, no identity beyond presence. It demonstrated the egoless awareness that we spend years trying to cultivate through meditation. The businessman's initial impulse to replace the cushion reflects our common tendency to equate value with appearance. We assume that new is better, expensive is superior, impressive is more effective. The master's teaching reveals how this mindset prevents us from recognizing the wisdom that develops through time, use, and faithful service. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The cushion spoke no words at all, yet its silent teaching about presence, patience, and unconditional support conveyed more wisdom than countless lectures about these qualities. Tonight, as you look around your living space, what humble objects might be offering teachings about presence, service, and acceptance? Perhaps it's time to bow to the teachers who have been supporting your life without seeking recognition. As the Buddha taught, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. When we release our preconceptions about what constitutes a teacher, we discover that wisdom is everywhere, waiting patiently for our recognition. Our next story speaks to the nature of the spiritual path itself through the wisdom of a mountain hermit. There once lived a hermit known as the Cloud Gatherer, who made his home high in the misty mountains, rarely descending to the villages below. He was not famous for grand sermons or dramatic enlightenment experiences, but for his solitary devotion to collecting wild herbs and observing the ever-changing patterns of the sky. His days were spent in simple activities, grinding roots into medicine, watching clouds form and dissolve, listening to the wind carry messages from distant peaks. Many pilgrims attempted the arduous climb to seek his wisdom, following faint trails that seemed to disappear and reappear like thoughts in meditation. The path was treacherous, marked by loose stones and sudden weather changes, but those who persevered often found the hermit engaged in the most ordinary tasks. One blustery afternoon, a determined scholar reached the hermit's modest shelter, exhausted but eager after 3 days of difficult climbing. His robes were torn from thorns, his feet blistered from the rocky path, but his mind burned with spiritual ambition. "Master," he panted, steadying himself against a weathered pine tree. "I have followed the faint trail for days, sleeping on cold ground and eating only the dried fruit I carried. I seek the path to enlightenment. Where does it lead? What must I do to find the true way?" The Cloud Gatherer, who was meticulously sifting dried tea leaves in a wooden bowl, looked up slowly. Mountain mist swirled around them both, creating and dissolving shapes in the thin air. He gestured vaguely toward the winding, barely discernible path the scholar had just climbed. "It leads precisely from where you thought you began, and precisely to where you now stand," he said, his voice as soft as the wind through pine needles. The scholar frowned deeply, his expectations of profound revelation crashing against this simple statement. "But this is merely the physical trail," he protested, gesturing back down the mountain. "I mean the real path, the spiritual journey you have taken. Surely there's a map, a set of practices, a secret teaching that leads to awakening." The Cloud Gatherer smiled, a serene expression that seemed to mirror the vast sky above them. The cloud leaves no track in the sky, yet it moves and transforms the entire landscape below. The dewdrop, once fallen, leaves no trace on the leaf, yet it nourishes the plant's deepest roots. He paused, watching a cloud pass through the space between them, temporarily obscuring and then revealing the distant peaks. The path of true understanding is not the one you follow with your feet, but the one that disappears behind you, leaving only the present moment, fully inhabited. Each step erases itself, each breath begins fresh, each moment offers the complete teaching. The scholar stood in the swirling mist, his mental maps and spiritual plans suddenly seeming irrelevant. He had climbed the mountain seeking a destination, only to discover that the seeking itself was the path, and the path was dissolving even as he walked it. As the Buddha taught, there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. The heart of this lesson lies in our fundamental misunderstanding about spiritual development and life itself. Why do we constantly seek the path, rather than recognizing we're already on it? The mind creates elaborate stories about spiritual progress, levels to achieve, stages to pass through, destinations to reach. These mental constructs provide a sense of purpose and direction, but they also create the illusion that fulfillment exists somewhere other than here, in some future moment of attainment. The cloud gatherer's teaching points to the paradox of the pathless path. Every genuine spiritual tradition eventually arrives at this understanding. The goal of the journey is to realize there was never anywhere to go, not because the journey is meaningless, but because the seeker and the sought are not separate. The path and the destination are one. Consider how this applies to your daily experience. You're constantly traveling from this moment to the next, yet you never actually arrive anywhere except here. You're always moving from this breath to the next, yet you're never breathing anywhere except now. The spiritual path operates according to the same logic. It's a journey without distance to a destination that was never absent. The metaphor of the cloud that leaves no track reveals the nature of mindful living. Each moment arises, is fully experienced, and dissolves without trace. This isn't passive resignation, but active engagement with impermanence. When we stop trying to preserve experiences or accumulate spiritual achievements, we discover the freedom of traveling light. Zen teacher Alan Watts wrote, "The point is not to get anywhere, but to be where you are and enjoy it." This understanding dissolves the anxiety that drives so much spiritual seeking, the fear that we're not progressing fast enough, practicing correctly enough, or understanding deeply enough. The dewdrop that nourishes without leaving a trace represents the way authentic spiritual practice affects us. Meditation doesn't leave tangible achievements we can point to, yet it gradually transforms our relationship to everything. Compassion doesn't create a resume of good deeds, yet it softens our heart's resistance to life's difficulties. The scholar's question about maps and secret teachings reflects our desire for spiritual security. We want guaranteed methods, proven techniques, and clear measurements of progress. But the cloud gatherer's wisdom suggests that such certainties actually obstruct genuine awakening by keeping us focused on future attainment rather than present reality. The Buddha said, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but when you yourself observe and analyze and find that it agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." This teaching invites us to test spiritual concepts against our direct experience, rather than accepting them as abstract truths. The path that disappears behind us means we can't rely on past spiritual experiences to validate our current understanding. Each moment requires fresh attention, beginner's mind, and willingness to not know. Yesterday's insights become today's limitations if we cling to them as permanent achievements. Tonight, as you rest in this moment between day and night, can you feel yourself already standing where you've always been seeking to arrive? Perhaps the path you've been looking for is the simple awareness that notices this breath, this heartbeat, this exact experience of being alive. As the Buddha taught, the present moment is the only time over which we have dominion. In recognizing this truth, we discover that the spiritual path is not a journey to somewhere else, but the art of being fully here, where we've always been. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a story about the unexpected fruits of awakening. In a mountain monastery surrounded by ancient pine forests, there lived a young monk named Kosen, who had devoted himself to meditation with exceptional dedication. For years he sat in silent practice, studied the sutras with scholarly precision, and performed his duties with meticulous care. His commitment to the spiritual path was unwavering, his discipline exemplary. During a week-long silent retreat, something extraordinary happened. On the 5th day of intensive meditation, as dawn light filtered through the meditation hall windows, Kosen experienced what can only be described as a profound opening. The boundaries he had assumed existed between himself and the world simply dissolved. The seeking that had driven him for years revealed itself as unnecessary. What he had been searching for with such desperate intensity had never been hidden. But instead of the serene composure that everyone expected from such an awakening, Kosen began to laugh. Not the polite chuckle of social conversation or the brief amusement at a clever joke, but deep, irrepressible laughter that seemed to bubble up from an inexhaustible spring of joy. At first, his fellow monks assumed this was a natural response, a release of years of accumulated spiritual tension. But hours passed, then days, and still Kosen laughed, not hysterically or uncontrollably, but with a constant, gentle chuckling that accompanied everything he did. He laughed while chanting morning prayers. He laughed while sweeping temple courtyards. He even laughed quietly in his sleep, his dreams apparently filled with the same irrepressible mirth. The other monks initially tried to be understanding, but as weeks turned into months, Kosen's constant laughter became increasingly difficult to bear. "This is disrespectful," they complained to the abbot during their weekly meeting. "How can we maintain the proper atmosphere for serious spiritual practice with his continuous giggling? People come here seeking peace and solemnity, not comedy." The abbot observed Kosen carefully before responding. Despite his unusual condition, the young monk performed all his responsibilities with flawless attention. His meditation remained deep and stable. His service to the community was thorough and mindful. The only change was this persistent, gentle laughter that accompanied his every action like background music. Finally, the abbot approached Kosen directly after evening meditation. "Son," he said with genuine curiosity, "why do you laugh so constantly? What do you find so amusing about our serious spiritual work?" Kosen tried to compose himself, but even as he spoke, soft waves of laughter rippled through his words. "Master," he said, his eyes twinkling with inexplicable delight, "I spent 12 years sitting in this very hall, desperately seeking my original nature. I read thousands of pages of Dharma teachings, performed countless prostrations, and tortured myself with doubt and spiritual ambition." He paused as another gentle laugh arose from somewhere deep in his chest. "And then I realized Buddha nature was never hidden from me for even a single moment. It was closer than my own heartbeat, more intimate than my thoughts. I was like someone frantically searching for their glasses while wearing them on their face." His laughter intensified slightly as he continued. The cosmic joke is too wonderful to contain. We exhaust ourselves looking for what we already are, seeking what has never been lost, trying to become what we've always been. How could anyone not laugh at such beautiful absurdity? The abbot felt his own stern expression beginning to soften, then crack into a smile, and finally dissolve into full-hearted laughter that echoed through the valley. Within minutes, the entire community was laughing, not at anything specific, but at the magnificent foolishness of the human spiritual search that leads us in a perfect circle back to our starting point. The Buddha once said, "The whole secret of existence is to have no fear. Never fear what will become of you, depend on no one. Only the moment you reject all help are you freed." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound relief that comes from recognizing our inherent completeness. Why does spiritual awakening sometimes manifest as uncontrollable joy rather than serene peace? The realization of our true nature can be so startling, so contrary to our assumed limitations, that laughter becomes the only adequate response. We discover that the problem we've been trying so desperately to solve, our supposed separation from wholeness, never actually existed. Kosen's laughter represents the joy of recognizing what Zen calls original face, the essence of who we are before we learn to think we were insufficient. This isn't intellectual understanding but direct recognition, like suddenly seeing that what you thought was a dangerous snake in the garden was just a harmless rope. Consider the years of spiritual effort that many people invest in trying to fix themselves, improve themselves, or transcend themselves. Meditation to quiet the mind, yoga to purify the body, study to enlighten the intellect, service to open the heart. All these practices have value, but the ultimate discovery is that the seeker and the sought were never separate. The cosmic joke Kosen discovered is that we are already what we're trying to become. The peace we seek through meditation is the awareness that notices both agitation and calm. The love we cultivate through practice is the heart that's capable of both opening and closing. The wisdom we pursue through study is the consciousness that can observe both knowing and not knowing. This doesn't invalidate spiritual practice any more than recognizing you're already wearing your glasses invalidates the search for them. The search leads to the recognition, even if the recognition reveals the search was based on a misunderstanding. Every step of the path contributes to the moment of seeing that there was nowhere to go. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This points to the ordinariness of awakening. It's not a special state achieved by special people after special efforts, but the recognition of what's already naturally present. The breath breathing, the heart beating, awareness aware. These aren't spiritual achievements, but simple facts of existence. Kosen's laughter also reveals the relief of dropping the burden of self-improvement. When we recognize our inherent wholeness, we can finally stop the exhausting project of trying to fix ourselves. This doesn't lead to complacency, but to authentic engagement with life from a place of sufficiency rather than lack. The Buddha said, "Look within, you are the Buddha." This invitation points directly to the source of Kosen's laughter, not because we become Buddha through practice, but because we recognize we never stopped being Buddha, even in our confusion. Tonight, as you consider the spiritual seeking that has shaped your life, Can you glimpse the humor in your earnest efforts to find what was never lost? Perhaps there's relief available in recognizing that you don't need to become worthy of peace, love, or freedom. You already are the awareness in which all experiences arise and pass away. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. In this recognition, we might find ourselves joining Kosen's gentle, inexhaustible laughter at the beautiful joke of being exactly what we've always been seeking. Now, let us explore a story about the sacred nature of ordinary moments through the wisdom of a great master. Master Huang Po was renowned throughout ancient China for his profound teachings and his fierce method of cutting through spiritual delusion. Students would travel for months across dangerous mountain passes and rushing rivers just to receive a single word of instruction from him. His reputation preceded him into every village and monastery, spoken of in whispers as one who could shatter years of confusion with a single, perfectly aimed phrase. One such student, after a journey of many weeks, finally gained the precious opportunity for a private audience. He had prepared extensively for this moment, memorizing classical questions about the nature of mind, the meaning of the ancient sutras, and the direct path to enlightenment. His heart raced with anticipation as he approached the master's simple chamber. "Master Huang Po," he began with formal reverence, bowing deeply before the great teacher. "I have traveled far and endured many hardships to reach you. I have come seeking the deepest teachings of Zen, the most profound wisdom you possess. Please share with me the secret transmission that will liberate me from suffering." The master looked at him with eyes that seemed tired despite their clarity, as if he had seen this same eager seeking countless times before. "I'm sorry," he said with genuine apologetic tone, "but today is my day off." The student was speechless with shock. His carefully prepared questions dissolved into confusion. "Day off?" he finally managed to stammer. "But master, surely awakened beings don't need rest. Surely the Dharma is always flowing, always available. How can enlightenment take a holiday?" Instead of answering with philosophical discourse, Huang Po simply smiled and gestured for the bewildered student to follow him. Rather than proceeding to the meditation hall where formal teachings occurred, or to his study where sacred texts were discussed, they walked to the humble kitchen behind the main building. There, surrounded by simple clay pots and wooden utensils, Master Huang Po rolled up his sleeves and began washing dishes from the morning meal. His movements were unhurried and natural, each gesture flowing seamlessly into the next. He picked up a rice bowl, examined it with the same attention he might give to a profound sutra, and began cleaning it with gentle, circular motions. He hummed a simple folk tune his grandmother had taught him decades earlier. "Master," the student pressed, his voice tight with urgency, "when will you teach me about enlightenment? When will you share the secret wisdom I've come so far to receive?" Without pausing in his washing or lifting his eyes from the soapy water, Huang Po replied softly, "Who told you I'm not teaching you right now? Who said this isn't the transmission you came seeking?" The student watched more carefully, his preconceptions about spiritual instruction beginning to crack. The master lifted each bowl with the same reverent attention he gave to his most celebrated Dharma talks. He rinsed each wooden spoon as if it contained the very essence of Buddha nature. He dried each cup as mindfully as if he were handling the most precious religious artifact. Steam rose from the warm dishwater, catching the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window. The simple sounds of washing, water flowing, pottery clinking gently, seemed to create their own teaching rhythm. Huangpo's movements embodied a quality of presence that the student had never witnessed during formal meditation periods. "There is no such thing as a day off from awakening," the master said without looking up from his work. "But there is also no such thing as a special day for awakening." This exact moment, feeling tired after teaching, washing leftover rice from ceramic bowls, breathing in the steam rising from dishwater, this is the most profound teaching available. He held up a simple cup, examining it in the light before setting it carefully on the drying rack. "If you cannot find Buddha nature in dishwater and leftover breakfast, you will never find it in a monastery or sacred text. If this ordinary moment is not perfect as it is, no amount of spiritual practice will make any other moment acceptable." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, there are only two mistakes one can make along the road to truth: not going all the way and not starting. Here we discover that the spiritual path is not separate from daily life, but is daily life, met with complete presence and appreciation. Why do we create such sharp divisions between ordinary activities and spiritual practice? Our minds are conditioned to believe that awakening requires special circumstances, elevated states, or extraordinary experiences. We imagine that enlightenment happens in meditation halls, not kitchens, through profound realizations, not simple tasks, during retreats, not regular Tuesday afternoons. Huangpo's teaching reveals the democracy of awakening. Consciousness is equally present whether we're contemplating the deepest philosophical questions or scrubbing yesterday's rice from a ceramic bowl. The quality of awareness we bring to washing dishes is identical to the awareness available during the most elevated spiritual experiences. Consider how this understanding might transform your relationship to routine activities. Washing your own dishes becomes an opportunity to practice the same presence that mystics cultivate in caves. Folding laundry offers the same potential for mindfulness as walking meditation. Preparing meals can be as sacred as any religious ceremony when performed with complete attention. The student's expectation of receiving secret teachings points to a common misunderstanding about wisdom transmission. We imagine that enlightenment involves receiving hidden knowledge or special techniques known only to advanced practitioners. But Huangpo demonstrates that the most profound teachings are completely visible and available in every moment. This doesn't diminish the value of formal spiritual practice, any more than recognizing the nutrition in simple food diminishes the art of cooking. Meditation, study, and contemplation create the conditions for recognizing what was always present. They train our attention to notice the extraordinary nature of ordinary experience. Zen Master Dogen taught, "Time is not separate from you, and as you are present, time does not go away." Huangpo's dishwashing embodies this understanding. He doesn't wash dishes to get them clean so he can move on to more important activities. He washes dishes because washing dishes is what this moment offers, and this moment is the only place where life and awakening actually occurs. The master's humming while he works reveals another dimension of spiritual maturity. He doesn't approach even mundane tasks with grim seriousness or forced mindfulness. There's a natural joy in engaging fully with whatever life presents, whether it's a prestigious teaching opportunity or a sink full of dirty bowls. The Buddha said, "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment." Huang Po's kitchen teaching demonstrates this principle in action. He's not mentally elsewhere, planning future teachings or reliving past insights. He's completely absorbed in the simple task at hand. Tonight, as you engage in the ordinary activities that fill your evening, perhaps preparing food, cleaning up from the day, or getting ready for rest, can you bring the same quality of attention that you might offer to formal meditation? Perhaps you'll discover that your kitchen sink contains the same wisdom that students travel thousands of miles to receive. As the Buddha taught, if you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. In honoring the sacred nature of ordinary moments, we discover that enlightenment is not somewhere else, waiting to be found, but here, waiting to be recognized. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the ultimate nature of spiritual truth. This is the encounter between the emperor and the master. In ancient China, there ruled an emperor known throughout the land for his devotion to the Buddhist path. Unlike rulers who concerned themselves only with wealth and territory, this emperor had spent years studying sacred texts, supporting monasteries, and seeking the deepest truths of existence. His palace library contained thousands of scrolls, and he had invited many learned monks to share their wisdom. When word reached him of a great Zen master whose understanding transcended conventional knowledge, the emperor immediately sent an invitation. He longed to test his own understanding against this master's renowned wisdom. The day of the master's arrival, the palace buzzed with anticipation. The emperor had prepared elaborate questions that would demonstrate both his devotion and sophisticated grasp of Buddhist doctrine. Surely such preparation would impress even the most accomplished teacher. When the master entered the throne room, he appeared utterly ordinary. His robes were simple and travel-worn, his bearing humble, yet alert. The emperor, seated on his golden throne beneath paintings of Buddhist saints, felt both excited and nervous. "Venerable Master," the emperor began, his voice echoing through the vast hall decorated with precious statues and sacred symbols. "I have studied the Buddhist teachings for many years. I have built temples, supported monks, and devoted my life to understanding the sacred path. Now I ask you, what is the highest truth of the holy Buddhist doctrine?" The emperor leaned forward expectantly, anticipating a profound discourse that would confirm his years of study. Perhaps the master would elaborate on the Four Noble Truths or reveal some secret teaching passed down through generations. Instead, the master looked directly into the emperor's eyes with a gaze that seemed to see through all pretense. His response came quietly. Vast emptiness, and not a trace of holiness. Silence filled the throne room. The emperor blinked, certain he had misheard. Where was the elaborate explanation of Buddhist cosmology? Where were the references to sacred texts and divine principles? "If there is no holiness," the emperor asked, his voice betraying confusion and dismay, "then who or what are you? If there is no sacred truth to attain, what makes you a master?" The emperor's questions carried the weight of years spent accumulating spiritual knowledge and religious merit. He had built his identity around being a devout Buddhist ruler, and this master's words seemed to dissolve the foundation of that carefully constructed self-image. The master's response came with the same quiet directness. "I do not know." With these three simple words, The master had stripped away every concept, every identity, every claim to understanding that the emperor had accumulated. The master departed as simply as he had arrived, leaving the emperor in contemplative silence. As the Buddha observed, "Those who think they know, don't know. Those who know they don't know, know." This paradoxical teaching points to the heart of Zen understanding. True wisdom begins not with accumulating knowledge, but with recognizing the limitations of conceptual thinking itself. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual seeking often becomes another form of grasping. We collect teachings and insights like precious jewels, believing enlightenment lies in acquiring enough sacred knowledge. But ultimate truth cannot be possessed or described in conventional terms. The Master's declaration of vast emptiness points to shunyata, often translated as emptiness. This doesn't mean nothing exists, but that nothing exists in the solid, independent way our thoughts assume. Every phenomenon arises interdependently without fixed essence. This emptiness is not a concept to understand, but a reality to embody. When the Master says there is not a trace of holiness, he's not denying spiritual experience, but pointing to truth that transcends dualistic thinking, separating sacred from ordinary. The very search for holiness implies our present experience lacks something essential when completeness is already here. Consider how this teaching might illuminate your spiritual journey. Have you noticed how the mind tries to turn insights into possessions? We have powerful experiences and want to understand, categorize, and repeat them. Yet each time we grasp, we move away from the simple presence that made them possible. The emperor represents the sincere seeker who has confused spiritual materialism with genuine awakening. His years of study weren't meaningless, but they had become obstacles to direct recognition of what was always present. The Master's "I do not know" represents the wisdom of don't know mind. This is not ignorance, but open unknowing that remains receptive to what is actually happening rather than filtering through preconceptions. From this mind, appropriate action arises without conceptual interference. In our culture that prizes knowledge, admitting "I don't know" feels like failure. But in Zen understanding, this acknowledgement becomes a doorway to fresh perception. The expert mind sees what it expects. The beginner's mind sees what is actually there. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's presence, what would it be like to temporarily set aside everything you think you know about spirituality? Can you taste the freedom in not knowing, the spaciousness that opens when we stop trying to fill emptiness with concepts? As the Buddha taught, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The vast emptiness the Master pointed to is infinitely spacious, containing all possibilities while being limited by none. In recognizing this emptiness as our true nature, we discover the most ordinary miracle. This moment, exactly as it is, lacking nothing. Let us now turn to a story about the misconceptions that can arise around spiritual practice and the true nature of awakening. This is the teaching of the tile and the mirror. In the quiet meditation hall of an ancient monastery, a dedicated student sits in perfect stillness. His posture is impeccable, his breathing regulated, his concentration focused with laser-like intensity. For hours each day, he maintains this practice, convinced that through sheer determination and disciplined effort, he will achieve the ultimate goal of his spiritual seeking to become a Buddha. The young monk's devotion is unquestionable. He rises before dawn, sits through the discomfort of aching legs and restless mind, and returns to his cushion again and again with unwavering commitment. In his understanding, meditation is the direct path to enlightenment, and sufficient hours of practice will inevitably produce the transformation he seeks. His Zen master observes this intense effort with interest. One afternoon, as the student enters another deep meditation session, the master quietly takes a ceramic roof tile and begins scraping it rhythmically against a large stone. The sound is persistent and somewhat jarring in the peaceful atmosphere of the temple grounds. For some time, the student tries to maintain his concentration despite the distraction. But as the scraping continues, curiosity eventually overcomes his meditative discipline. Opening his eyes, he watches his master working with apparent purpose, moving the tile against the stone with steady, repetitive motions. Unable to contain his puzzlement any longer, the student speaks respectfully. "Master, forgive my interruption, but may I ask what you are doing with that tile?" The Zen master looks up from his work with complete seriousness and replies, "I am polishing this tile until it becomes a mirror." The student stares in bewilderment. "But master, surely you know that no amount of polishing can transform a tile into a mirror. They are fundamentally different materials with entirely different properties. This seems impossible." The master nods thoughtfully and sets down the tile. "Indeed," he says, looking directly at his student. "How can you become a Buddha through meditation? If you are not already Buddha nature, no amount of sitting will create what isn't there. The Buddha taught, 'Look within, you are the Buddha.' This tale unveils the fundamental misconception about spiritual practice that treats awakening as an acquisition rather than a recognition. Why do we approach spiritual development as if consciousness can be manufactured through technique? Buddhist psychology explains that this gaining mind reflects our deepest conditioning about how things work in the material world. We assume that sufficient effort applied to spiritual practices will produce enlightenment, just as sufficient study produces knowledge or sufficient training produces skills. This mechanical approach to awakening creates what Zen calls practice enlightenment confusion. We imagine that meditation, like polishing, will gradually transform our ordinary consciousness into something extraordinary. The harder we polish, the more enlightened we should become. The longer we sit, the closer we should move towards some future attainment. The master's demonstration reveals the absurdity of this approach. A tile's essential nature cannot be changed through external action, only its surface appearance. Similarly, our Buddha nature cannot be created through practice, because it's already the foundation of our being. Meditation doesn't manufacture awakening. At best, it removes the obstacles that obscure our recognition of what's already present. This doesn't diminish the value of meditation, but clarifies its purpose. Sitting practice isn't about becoming someone different, but about discovering who we've always been beneath our mental elaborations. It's not transformation, but revelation. Not acquisition, but recognition. Master Dogen taught that practice and enlightenment are one seamless reality. We don't sit in order to become enlightened. Sitting itself is the expression of our enlightened nature when we're not trying to get somewhere else. This subtle shift from doing meditation to being meditation transforms the entire enterprise. Consider how this understanding might change your relationship to spiritual practice. Instead of working towards some future achievement, you're exploring the nature of consciousness itself right now. Instead of accumulating spiritual experiences, you're investigating what's experiencing everything. Instead of becoming enlightened, you're discovering how awareness appears to itself in this moment. The Buddha said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." When we think awakening is something to be achieved, we become achievers. When we recognize it as our natural state temporarily obscured, we become relaxed explorers of our own awareness. This recognition extends beyond formal meditation into everyday activities. Washing dishes isn't preparation for enlightenment. It's enlightenment expressing itself as dishwashing when done with complete presence. Working, walking, talking, and resting all become opportunities for awareness to recognize itself, rather than stepping stones towards some distant realization. Zen Master Bankei taught about the unborn mind that's already awake and doesn't need improvement. When you're angry, he would say, anger is being angry. When you're peaceful, peace is being peaceful. The unborn awareness that knows these states never becomes any of them and needs no fixing. The student in our story represents everyone who has confused spiritual effort with spiritual attainment. His dedication was admirable, but his understanding created unnecessarily complicated relationships with natural awareness. Enlightenment isn't earned through accumulated sitting time, but recognized through clear seeing. This doesn't encourage spiritual laziness, but points toward effortless effort. The kind of practice that emerges when we stop trying to get somewhere and start exploring where we already are. Paradoxically, this often leads to deeper and more consistent engagement with formal practice. The tile polishing also represents any spiritual technique that emphasizes gradual development over direct recognition. While practices can be beneficial for developing stability and concentration, they become obstacles when treated as enlightenment manufacturing processes. Tonight, as you settle into whatever forms of spiritual practice call to you, can you experiment with the difference between doing practice and being practice? Perhaps you'll discover that the very awareness you're trying to develop through technique is already timelessly present, simply waiting to be noticed. As the Buddha observed, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The peace you seek through polishing tiles is already the nature of the awareness that seeks it. Now, let us turn to a tale about the danger of expectations and the wisdom that often arrives in the most unexpected forms. This is the new abbot. The monks of Shofukuji Temple had received exciting news. Their new abbot was finally arriving. For weeks, they had prepared for this momentous occasion, cleaning every corner of the temple until it gleamed, rehearsing proper protocols, and discussing among themselves what sort of impressive figure their new spiritual leader might be. They imagined someone commanding and dignified, perhaps tall and elegant, certainly someone whose very presence would inspire immediate reverence and respect. On the appointed day, the entire community assembled on the outskirts of Hakata to properly greet their distinguished new teacher. They arranged themselves in formal lines along the main road, their freshly cleaned robes neat and orderly, their minds filled with anticipation about the wisdom and authority that would soon guide their community. They waited as the afternoon sun moved across the sky. Hours passed, and still no figure matching their expectations appeared on the road. Various travelers passed by, merchants with their goods, families returning from market, officials on horseback. but none resembled the eminent Zen master they expected to encounter. As the day grew longer and their vigil continued, the monks began to grow restless and confused. Where was their new abbot? Had there been some mistake about the timing? Perhaps he had taken a different route, or his journey had been delayed by unforeseen circumstances. As twilight approached and shadows lengthened across the road, the monks noticed a small, unremarkable figure approaching in the distance. As the person drew nearer, they could see it was a stunted, bedraggled beggar priest, his robes worn and patched, his appearance suggesting he had been traveling rough roads for many days without proper rest or meals. His stature was unimpressive, his demeanor humble to the point of seeming almost apologetic. This ragged figure certainly didn't match their image of a distinguished abbot, but the monks' curiosity was piqued. Perhaps this wandering priest had encountered their expected teacher along the road and could provide information about his whereabouts or estimated arrival time. "Hey, you there!" they called out to the bedraggled monk as he passed slowly along the main road in the gathering dusk. "On your journey here, did you happen to meet an eminent priest called Master Sengai? We're waiting for him. He's supposed to be our new abbot." The shabby figure paused in his walking, remaining silent for a long moment as he regarded the assembled monks with eyes that seemed to hold depths they hadn't initially noticed. Then, with quiet simplicity, he replied, "Sengai, yes, that's me." The monks stood in stunned silence, their carefully constructed expectations crumbling around them like autumn leaves. This small, humble, travel-worn priest was their new spiritual leader. This was the renowned master they had heard so much about. The contrast between their anticipations and reality could hardly have been more complete. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, do not judge by appearances. A rich heart may be under a poor coat. This tale unveils a profound teaching about the nature of authentic wisdom and the dangerous limitations of our preconceptions about how truth should present itself. Why do we consistently expect wisdom to arrive in impressive packages? This tendency reflects our deep conditioning to equate external appearance with internal worth, status with wisdom, and dramatic presentation with authentic realization. We have been trained by our culture to look for authority in all the wrong places, missing the genuine article because it doesn't match our fantasies. The monks' careful preparations and formal reception committee reveal something touching yet misguided about human nature. Their sincere desire to honor their new teacher led them to create elaborate expectations that actually prevented them from recognizing him when he appeared. Their respect was real, but it was directed toward an imaginary figure rather than the actual person walking toward them. This ancient wisdom illuminates how often we miss the extraordinary because we're scanning for the spectacular. In our daily lives, we overlook profound insights from unexpected sources because the messenger doesn't fit our preconceptions about who should be teaching us. The wisdom of a child gets dismissed because we expect profundity from adults. The insight of a homeless person gets ignored because we associate wisdom with success and status. Consider how many opportunities for learning and growth we might miss because they arrive through humble channels. The co-worker who seems ordinary but offers exactly the perspective we need. The difficult situation that appears problematic but contains precisely the lesson our soul requires. The simple practice that seems too basic but holds the key to breakthrough. Zen teachings illuminate another aspect of this story through the concept of beginner's mind. Master Sengai's humble appearance wasn't a disguise or an affectation. It reflected his genuine lack of attachment to impressive presentations and social status. True wisdom often travels light, unencumbered by the heavy baggage of reputation and expectation. The monk's shock upon learning their bedraggled traveler's identity points to a fundamental misunderstanding about the relationship between realization and appearance. We imagine that enlightened people should look enlightened, that wise teachers should present themselves in ways that immediately command respect and recognition. But authentic spiritual development often moves in the opposite direction, towards simplicity, humility, and freedom from the need to impress others. This story also reveals our tendency to create elaborate preparations for experiences we think we want, while remaining unprepared for what actually shows up. The monks had everything ready for their imaginary, impressive abbot, but were completely unprepared to recognize their actual teacher. How often do we miss life's real gifts because we're focused on receiving different gifts that match our expectations better? We also find ourselves confronted by questions about the nature of spiritual authority. What makes someone qualified to teach or lead? Is it their appearance, their credentials, their ability to meet our preconceptions, or something else entirely? Master Sengai's quiet, "Yes, that's me," carried more authentic authority than any dramatic entrance could have provided. Beyond this, there emerges a teaching about the humility that often accompanies genuine wisdom. Notice that Master Sengai didn't arrive with fanfare or make any effort to prepare the monks for his appearance. He simply appeared as he was, allowing their expectations to be naturally corrected by reality rather than trying to manage their perceptions. The story points us toward understanding the difference between the authority we project onto others based on externals and the authority that emerges from direct realization. True spiritual teaching doesn't depend on impressive presentations or meeting social expectations. It arises from authentic understanding and expresses itself through genuine presence rather than performance. Tonight, as you consider your own expectations about how wisdom, opportunity, or guidance should present itself in your life, can you notice where you might be missing authentic gifts because they arrive in humble packages? What would it mean to remain open to teachers and teachings that don't match your preconceptions about how truth should appear? As the Buddha taught, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Authentic wisdom reveals itself through presence and understanding rather than external presentation, inviting us to develop eyes that can recognize the extraordinary within the ordinary, the profound within the simple. Let us now turn to a story about the nature of identity and the mystery of consciousness itself. This is the tale of Chuang-Tzu and the butterfly. The ancient Taoist sage Chuang-Tzu lived simply, spending his days in quiet contemplation of the natural world and the deeper mysteries of existence. He was known for his profound insights into the nature of reality and his ability to see beyond the surface appearances that convince most people they understand the world around them. One afternoon, after a morning of walking through bamboo groves and observing the play of light on water, Chuang-Tzu lay down beneath a flowering tree to rest. The gentle warmth of the sun, the soft sound of wind through leaves, and the fragrance of spring blossoms created the perfect conditions for deep relaxation. As he settled into this peaceful state, his consciousness gradually shifted from ordinary waking awareness into the mysterious realm of dreams. In his dream, something extraordinary occurred. Chuang-Tzu found himself transformed into a beautiful butterfly, his human form completely forgotten. He fluttered gracefully from flower to flower, his delicate wings catching the sunlight as he moved through a world of pure color and sensation. There was no memory of being a philosopher, no awareness of human concerns or intellectual pursuits. He was simply and completely a butterfly, experiencing the world through compound eyes, navigating by instinct, living entirely in the present moment of flight and discovery. The butterfly that was Chuang-Tzu felt utterly free, unburdened by the heavy thoughts and complex worries that typically occupy human consciousness. There was only the joy of movement, the sweetness of nectar, the warm touch of sun on delicate wings. This wasn't a dream about being a butterfly while knowing he was really a man. It was the complete experience of butterfly existence, with no trace of human identity remaining. Then, as suddenly as the transformation had occurred, Chuang-Tzu awakened. He found himself lying beneath the tree, the afternoon sun having moved across the sky during his sleep. His human body felt solid and familiar, his philosopher's mind immediately active with questions and observations. The vivid dream began to fade as waking consciousness reasserted itself. But instead of simply dismissing the experience as an unusual dream, Chuang-Tzu found himself puzzled by a profound question that challenged everything he thought he knew about identity and reality. He sat up slowly, still feeling the lingering sensation of flight, and pondered the implications of what had just occurred. Was I just now a man dreaming I was a butterfly? He wondered aloud. Or am I perhaps a butterfly now dreaming that I am a man? The question wasn't merely playful speculation. It pointed to something fundamental about the nature of consciousness and identity that most people never consider. If the experience of being a butterfly had felt completely real and authentic while it was happening, how could he be certain that his current experience of being human was any more real or permanent? Buddha's wisdom teaches us all conditioned existence is impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. This ancient teaching illuminates the fluid nature of identity and the importance of not clinging too tightly to any particular sense of self. Why do we assume that our current state of consciousness represents the ultimate reality? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to take our present experience as fixed and absolute, when in fact, all states of consciousness, waking, dreaming, sleeping, are temporary and constantly changing phenomena arising in the vast space of awareness. Chuang-Tzu's question challenges our basic assumptions about who and what we are. During the dream, the butterfly identity felt completely authentic and real. Upon waking, the human identity seems equally authentic and real. But which one represents his true nature? Or is perhaps the question itself based on a false premise? Consider your own experience of identity throughout different states of consciousness. Are you the same you when you're dreaming as when you're awake? What about when you're deeply absorbed in an activity, or in deep meditation, or in moments of creative flow when self-consciousness disappears entirely? Which of these states represents your real identity? In Zen practice, we explore the possibility that all these different identities are simply temporary appearances in consciousness, like waves on the ocean or clouds in the sky. The waves are real, but they're not separate from the ocean. The clouds are real, but they're not separate from the sky. Similarly, all our various identities and experiences are real, but they're not separate from the underlying awareness in which they appear. The butterfly dream reveals something profound about the nature of transformation and possibility. If Chuang-Tzu could completely become a butterfly in his dream consciousness, what does that suggest about the fixed boundaries we imagine exist around our identity? How solid are the limitations we place on ourselves based on our current circumstances or self-concept? Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." Chuang-Tzu's experience points to this same teaching. The more deeply we investigate the nature of selfhood, the more we discover that our fixed ideas about identity begin to dissolve. The Buddha said, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form." The man and the butterfly are both real and both empty of permanent, independent existence. They are temporary formations in the field of consciousness, each authentic while present, each naturally dissolving to make way for whatever comes next. Look deeply at your own sense of identity. How much of who you think you are is based on roles, memories, and concepts that are actually quite fluid and changeable? What would remain if you let go of your attachment to being any particular type of person? Tonight, as you move between waking consciousness and the dream state, can you remember Chuang-Tzu's profound question? Can you hold your identity lightly, recognizing that whether you're experiencing yourself as human or butterfly, worker or dreamer, the awareness in which all these experiences arise remains constant and unbound? As the Buddha observed, everything is impermanent. Strive on with awareness. The man dreams of being a butterfly. The butterfly dreams of being a man. But the dreaming itself, the pure capacity for experience, remains as vast and free as the sky, untouched by whatever temporary forms dance within it. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the unexpected power that emerges from true humility. This is the tale of the monk whose greatest strength lay hidden beneath apparent weakness. Busugai was born into a family of renowned warriors, inheriting not only their fierce courage, but also their formidable physical power. Despite entering Buddhist orders at the tender age of 12, he never abandoned his martial training. Under monastic robes beat the heart of a fighter who had mastered archery, horsemanship, and every traditional combat art. His strength was legendary. It was said he could punch a hole through almost anything. The monks at his temple called him the monk with punching power, though few outside the monastery knew of his extraordinary abilities. During the turbulent mid-19th century, Japan was convulsed by civil unrest as old orders crumbled and new powers emerged. Into this chaos came a warrior band known as the New Elite, ambitious fighters who had come to Kyoto hoping to seize power in the changing political landscape. These men were crude, arrogant, and violent, terrorizing ordinary townspeople with their swagger and their swords. They considered themselves above both law and courtesy, taking what they wanted and harming anyone who opposed them. One afternoon, Butsugai was walking quietly through Kyoto's streets when the sound of clashing bamboo practice swords drew his attention. Following the noise, he found himself outside the new elite's quarters, watching through a window as the warriors trained. His monk's curiosity about martial technique overcame his usual discretion. and he lingered to observe their methods. Several warriors noticed the raggedly dressed monk peering in at them. Angered by what they saw as spying, they stormed outside and surrounded him aggressively. "What do you think you're doing here?" they demanded. "Who gave you permission to watch our training?" Butsugai bowed humbly, his voice soft with apology. "Please forgive me, honored warriors. I am only a simple monk who has just come down from the mountains. I heard sounds of training and was curious. I meant no offense." The warriors exchanged knowing glances, seeing an opportunity for cruel entertainment. "Anyone who spies on our training must know something about martial arts," they declared with menacing grins. "We insist that you demonstrate your skills. Come inside and face us." Despite his protests, Butsugai could not refuse without seeming cowardly. Reluctantly, he followed them into their training hall, where eager warriors began taking up bamboo swords to test this apparently helpless monk. What happened next astonished everyone present. Without showing the slightest alarm or aggression, Butsugai took his iron ceremonial scepter, a ritual object no one would have considered threatening, and began defending himself. Each warrior who attacked found his bamboo sword smashed to pieces by the monk's precise, effortless movements. One after another they came, and one after another their weapons were destroyed. Within minutes, several dozen elite fighters had been overcome by a single ragged monk who seemed barely to be trying. The sound of combat drew the attention of Kondo Isamu, the leader of the new elite, and a warrior of fearsome reputation. Stepping into the training hall with a spear in his hands, he announced, "Your skills are too much for these young knights, monk. But now I, Kondo Isamu, challenge you to face a real master. They call me a genius of the martial arts." Suddenly, Butsugai's entire demeanor changed. His eyes went wide with terror, and he threw himself to the ground in abject prostration. "Kondo Isamu!" he cried out. "I have heard your legendary name. Your reputation as a martial genius is known throughout Japan. A wandering monk like me could never hope to stand against someone of your incredible skill. Please, have mercy and let me go." This display of apparent cowardice only emboldened Kondo further. "Stand up and fight," he commanded. "I won't let you leave after such a demonstration. Prepare yourself." Forced into the confrontation, Butsugai reluctantly rose to his feet, still trembling with seeming fear. When Kondo offered him proper weapons, a bamboo sword or wooden spear, Butsugai shook his head. "As a Buddhist monk, I should not take up weapons of violence. This ceremonial scepter will have to suffice." Kondo pressed him further, insisting that the monk arm himself properly for their duel. Growing desperate, Butsugai reached into his traveling pouch and withdrew 2 simple wooden begging bowls, gripping one in each hand. "Very well," he said to the astonished warrior chief. "These will have to do. Please, go ahead and try to spear me if you can." This apparent insolence infuriated Kondo beyond measure. Here was a trembling monk claiming he could defend himself against a master spearman using nothing but eating bowls. The warrior's face flushed with rage as he gripped his weapon, determined to end this mockery with a single devastating thrust that would shatter the monk's ribs. For nearly half an hour, Kondo stood motionless, his spear poised, studying his opponent with unblinking intensity. He was looking for the perfect opening, the moment of vulnerability that would allow him to strike with overwhelming force. But somehow, no matter how carefully he observed, he could find no gap in the monk's unusual defense. Finally, convinced he had spotted his opportunity, Kondo unleashed every ounce of power and rage he possessed, in one tremendous spear thrust aimed directly at Butsugai's chest. The attack came with the speed of lightning and the force of a mountain avalanche. But Butsugai moved with even greater speed and impossible agility. Slipping the attack by mere inches, he immediately caught the spear shaft between his two wooden bowls, clamping it in a grip so powerful that it became absolutely immovable. The bowls, simple objects meant for collecting food donations, had become an unbreakable vice. Kondo pulled and pushed with all his might, his face turning red with exertion, sweat pouring down his brow. He twisted the spear this way and threw his entire body weight against it, but could not free his weapon from the monk's impossible grip. The harder he struggled, the more securely trapped his spear became between those ordinary begging bowls. After allowing this futile struggle to continue for some time, Butsugai suddenly released the spear with a piercing shout that seemed to shake the very walls. The abrupt release sent Kondo tumbling backward with such force that both he and his spear flew 20 or 30 feet across the training hall. Kondo lay stunned for a moment, then slowly rose to his feet. All his arrogance had evaporated. Bowing deeply to Butsugai, he spoke with genuine humility and respect. "Your skills are truly extraordinary, far beyond anything I have ever encountered. Who are you, really?" "I am simply a wandering monk named Butsugai," came the quiet reply. "So you are the famous monk with a punch," Kondo exclaimed, finally understanding who he had been facing. From that moment forward, he treated his former opponent with the greatest reverence. Word of this encounter spread throughout the ancient capital, and Butsugai's reputation grew far beyond the monastery walls. Yet when he completed his Zen studies and went into seclusion to deepen his realization, he showed no interest in fame or worldly success. Soon, however, people began gathering around him to study both Zen and martial arts, drawn by his unique combination of spiritual wisdom and physical mastery. A young swordsman once sought him out, asking for instruction. When Butsugai inquired about his purpose, the young man gave a remarkable answer: "I have come to die at the teacher's fists." Impressed by this attitude of total surrender, Butsugai allowed the swordsman to stay and presented him with a verse to contemplate. Even the power of the howling spirit, a single layer of mosquito netting. Through meditation on this paradoxical teaching, the young man eventually achieved deep understanding of what he called the hidden essence of jiu-jitsu, the gentle art. He later became renowned throughout Western Japan, always crediting Butsugai's verse for his insight. Despite receiving invitations from major barons who offered him the finest temples and luxurious accommodations, Butsugai remained in a poor temple until his death, wearing simple clothing and living contentedly on the bare necessities, never seeking anything beyond what he needed. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the sage does not attempt anything very big and thus achieves greatness. Here we discover how true power often conceals itself behind apparent weakness, and how genuine humility can be the most potent force of all. Why do we associate power with aggression and dominance, rather than with skillful restraint? Our conditioning teaches us that strength must be displayed to be real, that victory requires the humiliation of opponents, that true mastery announces itself loudly. Butsugai's example reveals the profound difference between force and power, between conquest and mastery. This tale unveils the sophisticated strategy that emerges from genuine spiritual development. Butsugai's apparent terror before Kondo wasn't cowardice, but tactical brilliance. By allowing his opponent to become overconfident and enraged, he created the very conditions that made victory possible. His humility wasn't weakness, but the highest form of martial intelligence. The transformation from iron scepter to wooden bowls represents something profound about authentic spiritual power. The scepter, a symbol of religious authority, worked effectively against the ordinary warriors. But when facing the master, Butsugai instinctively reached for the most humble tools of his trade, begging bowls that represented his dependence on others' generosity. These simple objects became more powerful than any weapon, demonstrating that true strength emerges not from hardness, but from flexibility, not from aggression, but from responsiveness. Consider how often in your own life you might achieve more through strategic vulnerability than through displays of force. How many conflicts could be resolved more elegantly through apparent yielding than through direct confrontation? What would shift if you trusted that your genuine humility might be more influential than your attempts to prove your strength or correctness? Butsugai's verse about the mosquito netting points to the deepest level of this teaching. Even the most overwhelming force can be neutralized by the gentlest, most flexible response. A mosquito net stops insects not through hardness, but through appropriate positioning. Water defeats rock not through aggression, but through persistent gentleness. True martial arts, like authentic spirituality, finds the path of least resistance that accomplishes the greatest good. Zen Master Takuan taught, "The mind that is anxious to win will meet with certain defeat." Butsugai's victory came not from wanting to defeat anyone, but from responding appropriately to each moment. Against the ordinary warriors, appropriate response meant efficient defense. Against their leader, it meant appearing weak until the perfect moment for revelation. The young swordsman's declaration that he came to die at the teacher's fists represents the attitude that authentic learning requires, the willingness to let our false confidence, our ego's need to appear strong, our attachment to seeming invulnerable, all be destroyed in encounter with genuine mastery. Tonight, as you reflect on your own relationship to strength and weakness, can you sense the difference between power that needs to prove itself and power that serves from concealment? Can you feel how your genuine humility might be more transformative than your attempts at impressiveness? As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the gentlest response carries the greatest power to transform conflict into understanding. Let us keep going on our journey through these Zen teachings with a story that takes us back to the very beginning of spiritual seeking, reminding us that the innocent questions of childhood often contain the deepest wisdom. This is the flounder. When Master Ryokan was just 6 or 7 years old, long before he would become known for his wisdom and gentle compassion, he was simply a small boy living in his family home and subject to the ordinary expectations and disciplines that parents impose on their children. Like all children, he sometimes struggled with the routines and demands of family life, occasionally testing the boundaries of what was acceptable behavior. One particular morning, young Ryokan had slept later than was considered appropriate for a child his age. In households of that era, early rising was not just a preference, but a moral expectation, reflecting values of industry, discipline, and proper character development that parents felt responsible for instilling in their offspring. When his father discovered that the boy had overslept, he responded with the kind of correction that was considered both normal and necessary for proper child rearing. But young Ryokan's reaction to this parental discipline was not the immediate contrition or apology that his father expected. Instead, The boy looked up at his father with an intense, unwavering stare that seemed to challenge the authority being exercised over him. This direct, unflinching gaze from his small son struck the father as inappropriate and even defiant. In a culture that valued respectful submission to parental authority, such bold staring could be interpreted as disrespectful confrontation rather than innocent curiosity or natural childhood response to discipline. Anyone who glares at his father like that, the father declared, with the conviction of someone delivering both punishment and prophetic warning, will surely turn into a flounder. This pronouncement wasn't merely an expression of parental frustration, but reflected traditional beliefs about the consequences of improper behavior and disrespectful attitudes toward one's elders. In the folk wisdom of the time, certain forms of moral transgression could literally transform a person into animal form, with the specific animal chosen reflecting the nature of the offense. Upon hearing his father's words, young Ryokan was immediately filled with terror. Unlike an adult who might dismiss such a statement as metaphorical or emotional exaggeration, the child took his father's declaration with complete literalness. The prospect of actually transforming into a flounder, losing his human form and becoming a flat fish, seemed not only possible, but imminent and inevitable. Without saying another word, the frightened boy fled suddenly from the house and disappeared into the surrounding countryside. He ran as far from his family home as his small legs could carry him, eventually making his way to a cliff overlooking the ocean, where he believed his transformation into a flounder would most appropriately take place. As the day progressed and young Ryokan failed to return home, the entire household became increasingly worried about his whereabouts. Family members and neighbors organized search parties to look for the missing child, checking all his usual hiding places and favorite spots for play, but finding no trace of him anywhere. The search continued through the afternoon and into the evening, with growing concern about the boy's safety and welfare. Finally, as darkness began to fall, the searchers discovered young Ryokan sitting alone and dejected on the cliff by the ocean, staring out at the waves that he believed would soon become his natural habitat. "What are you doing here?" the searchers called out to him when they found him in this remote and potentially dangerous location. "Everyone has been looking for you. Why did you run away?" Young Ryokan's response revealed both the innocent literalness of childhood understanding and the profound existential anxiety that can emerge from taking adult pronouncements about moral consequences at face value. Looking up at his rescuers with genuine puzzlement and disappointment, he asked the question that had been troubling him throughout his long vigil by the ocean. "Haven't I turned into a flounder yet?" Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding how the fresh, unfiltered perception of childhood can reveal profound truths about the nature of identity, transformation, and the power of belief that adult sophistication often obscures. This story unveils something beautiful and profound about the innocent directness with which children approach existential questions that adults typically avoid through layers of conceptual sophistication and psychological defense. Young Ryokan's literal interpretation of his father's warning led him directly into confrontation with fundamental questions about identity, punishment, transformation, and the nature of the self that lie at the heart of all spiritual inquiry. His question, "Haven't I turned into a flounder yet?" contains more genuine philosophical depth than many elaborate theological discussions. In his childish literalness, he was actually grappling with profound questions about the nature of identity and change that would later become central to his mature spiritual understanding. The boy's willingness to wait patiently for his expected transformation demonstrates the kind of complete acceptance and surrender that adult spiritual practitioners often struggle to achieve through years of meditation and study. He didn't resist or deny the possibility of becoming a flounder. He simply went to what seemed like the appropriate place and waited for it to happen. Why do we typically dismiss childhood questions about identity and transformation as naive, rather than recognizing them as profound spiritual inquiry? This tendency reflects our adult investment in maintaining stable concepts of selfhood that childhood curiosity naturally challenges. We prefer the security of fixed identity to the openness that allows for genuine transformation. Young Ryokan's response to his father's pronouncement reveals the double-edged nature of parental authority and the unintended consequences that can emerge from moral instruction delivered through dramatic metaphors rather than patient explanation. What was meant as corrective discipline became an existential crisis that led the child into direct confrontation with questions about the nature of change and identity. This teaching illuminates the profound receptivity and literal faith that characterizes childhood consciousness before it becomes filtered through adult skepticism and psychological defensiveness. The boy's complete belief in the possibility of transformation, while seemingly naive, actually demonstrates the kind of openness to radical change that authentic spiritual development requires. His vigil by the ocean represents something touching and profound about the human willingness to face anticipated consequences with courage rather than denial. Unlike adults who might try to rationalize away unwelcome possibilities or distract themselves from difficult realities, young Ryokan went directly to where he believed his transformation would occur and waited with patient acceptance. This story also reveals how often our deepest spiritual insights emerge from taking seriously questions and possibilities that conventional wisdom dismisses as impossible or irrelevant. The child's literal interpretation of metaphorical language led him into genuine contemplation of transformation and identity that most adults avoid through interpretive sophistication. We can observe similar dynamics in many areas where childlike directness reveals truths that adult complexity obscures. The innocent questions that cut through elaborate explanations to expose underlying assumptions. The simple observations that reveal the arbitrary nature of social conventions. The natural curiosity about existence that isn't yet constrained by concepts of what's reasonable to wonder about. Zen practice cultivates what might be called mature innocence, the ability to approach profound questions with the same fresh directness that young Ryokan brought to his father's pronouncement, while integrating adult understanding and discernment. This involves recovering the capacity for wonder and literal engagement with possibilities that sophisticated thinking often dismisses. The image of the small boy sitting alone by the ocean, waiting patiently to become a flounder, captures something essential about the spiritual journey itself. The willingness to go to the edge of our known world and wait there with openness for whatever transformation life might bring, even if that transformation challenges everything we think we know about who we are. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that spiritual maturity involves moving beyond the simple questions of childhood toward more complex and sophisticated understanding. But this story suggests that the deepest wisdom often involves returning to childhood's direct engagement with existential mysteries, informed by adult experience, but not constrained by adult assumptions about what's possible. The story points us toward understanding that authentic transformation often requires the kind of radical openness to change that young Ryokan demonstrated, the willingness to wait patiently at the edge of the unknown, ready to become whatever life requires us to become, even if it challenges our most basic assumptions about our own nature. Tonight, as you consider your own relationship to transformation and change, can you recover some of young Ryokan's innocent willingness to take seriously the possibility of profound alteration in your own nature?
What would it mean to approach spiritual development with childlike openness to becoming something completely different from what you currently imagine yourself to be?
The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Through maintaining childlike openness to transformation, while developing adult wisdom and compassion, we discover that the deepest spiritual insights often emerge from the simplest questions about who we are and what we might become. The boy who wondered if he had turned into a flounder was already engaging with the fundamental koan of identity that would guide his entire spiritual journey. The recognition that what we are is far more fluid and mysterious than we typically imagine. Let us now explore a story about the difference between tentative engagement and wholehearted commitment in spiritual practice. This is the teaching of the Master's book and the student's hesitation. In the peaceful courtyard of a mountain monastery, where morning light filters through ancient pine trees and the air carries the sound of distant temple bells, a Zen master meets with a sincere student who has come seeking guidance on deepening his spiritual practice. The student's face shows the earnestness of someone genuinely committed to growth, yet something in his manner suggests an underlying reluctance to fully surrender to the path. The master, recognizing the student's dedication while also sensing his unconscious resistance, offers specific guidance designed to cultivate greater consistency and depth in meditation. I recommend that you sit in meditation 3 times each day, the master suggests with gentle authority. Morning, afternoon, and evening practice will provide the structure and repetition needed for your understanding to mature. The student listens attentively, nodding his head in apparent agreement as he considers this advice. The recommendation seems reasonable and well within his capabilities. He has been meditating sporadically and feels ready to increase his commitment to the practice. After a moment of contemplation, he responds with what he believes to be appropriate humility and realism. "Yes, Master," he says with sincere respect. "I will give it a try." The master receives this response with a slight nod, then turns to retrieve a book he has been carrying. As he pivots, the book appears to slip from beneath his arm and falls toward the ground. What follows seems almost comedic in its apparent clumsiness. The master bends to pick up the book, but somehow misjudges the distance, reaching for it, but grasping empty air several centimeters away from where the book actually lies. Again and again, the master reaches for the book, each time missing it by the same small margin. His efforts appear genuinely frustrated, as if he cannot understand why he cannot complete this simple task. His hand passes above the book beside it, but never quite connects with the object he is clearly trying to retrieve. The student watches this peculiar display with growing bewilderment. Here is a master renowned for his wisdom and precision, suddenly unable to accomplish the simplest physical action. Concern for his teacher's well-being overcomes his confusion, and he steps forward to help. "Allow me, Master," the student says, approaching the fallen book. Without difficulty, he bends down, grasps the book firmly, and straightens up to offer it to his teacher. The master's response is swift and startling. Instead of accepting the book with gratitude, he strikes it from the student's hands with enough force to send it flying across the courtyard. His voice carries uncharacteristic sharpness as he speaks. "I did not ask you to pick up the book. I only asked you to give it a try." As the Buddha observed, a jug fills drop by drop. Here we discover the essential difference between the tentative engagement that tries and the complete commitment that simply does what needs doing. Why do we so often hedge our spiritual commitments with escape clauses and mental reservations? Buddhist psychology reveals that trying language reflects the ego's resistance to total engagement. By saying we will try to meditate, attempt to be more compassionate, or work on being present, we create subtle psychological distance from fully embodying these practices. The student's promise to try meditation revealed an unconscious assumption that failure remained an acceptable option. This built-in excuse provided comfort for his ego, but undermined the wholehearted engagement that transforms understanding into wisdom. True practice requires what Zen calls no escape mind, complete presence with whatever we've chosen to undertake. The master's demonstration with the book brilliantly exposed the difference between these two approaches. When he tried to pick up the book, he failed repeatedly, despite having the obvious capability to succeed. When the student simply picked it up without mental commentary about trying, the task was accomplished effortlessly. This teaching points to something deeper than mere semantics. The language of trying often masks unconscious ambivalence about change. Part of us wants to develop spiritually, while another part resists the dissolution of familiar patterns. Trying allows both parts to feel satisfied. We can claim spiritual effort while maintaining unconscious permission to fall short. Buddhist teacher Charlotte Joko Beck often addressed this pattern with students who claimed they were working on anger or trying to be less reactive. "Don't work on your anger," she would say. "Just don't be angry. When you notice anger arising, choose something else." This directness cuts through the elaborate negotiations that keep us stuck in cycles of attempting rather than accomplishing. The master's seemingly clumsy performance also revealed how trying can actually create the very difficulties it claims to address. When we approach meditation with trying mind, we often generate tension and self-consciousness that make natural concentration more difficult. When we try to be compassionate, we can become artificial and performative rather than genuinely caring. Zen practice cultivates what might be called just do mind, the capacity to engage completely with chosen activities without the internal commentary that questions, hesitates, or provides exit strategies. This doesn't mean becoming rigid or forcing outcomes, but rather bringing total presence to whatever we've committed ourselves to doing. The Buddha taught that right effort is one of the essential elements of the spiritual path. This effort isn't the strained trying that exhausts itself through internal conflict, but the natural energy that arises when we align completely with beneficial action. It's like the difference between swimming against a current and swimming with it. One depletes our resources, while the other enables effortless movement. Consider areas of your life where you notice trying language creeping into your commitments. Perhaps you're trying to exercise regularly, working on being a better partner, or attempting to develop a meditation practice. What would shift if you moved from trying these activities to simply doing them? This doesn't mean we should never acknowledge our limitations or make realistic assessments of our capabilities. But there's a crucial difference between honest evaluation of what's possible and the unconscious hedging that undermines our own efforts before we begin. Master Linji taught his students about true person of no rank, someone who acts from their authentic nature without needing permission from doubt or fear. This person doesn't try to be enlightened, they simply express enlightenment through wholehearted engagement with ordinary activities. The master's final instruction, striking the book from the student's hands, emphasized that spiritual practice isn't about perfect performance, but about total presence. The student succeeded in picking up the book, not because he was more skilled than his teacher, but because he engaged the task completely rather than half-heartedly. Tonight, as you consider your own spiritual commitments and life goals, can you notice where trying might be creating obstacles to natural accomplishment? Perhaps you'll discover that many things become surprisingly achievable when approached with simple directness, rather than elaborate mental preparations for possible failure. As the Buddha taught, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. This includes accepting that wholehearted commitment often proves more effective than tentative trying, and living up to that understanding through complete engagement with whatever path we choose to walk. Let us now turn to a tale that reveals how deeply our ego can hide, even from ourselves. This is the story of the Prime Minister's lesson. In the grand capital of the Tang dynasty, where golden palaces rose toward heaven and scholars debated philosophy in moonlit gardens, there lived a man of extraordinary accomplishments. The Prime Minister had earned his position through brilliance in both statecraft and military strategy, defending the empire from invaders while crafting policies that brought prosperity to millions. His name was spoken with reverence throughout the land, and his counsel was sought by the emperor himself. Yet despite his worldly success, the Prime Minister considered himself a humble student of the Buddha's teachings. Each week, he would leave behind the silk robes and ceremonial duties of his office, donning simple clothes to visit his beloved Zen master in a modest temple on the outskirts of the city. There, surrounded by weathered wooden beams and the gentle sound of wind chimes, he would sit in meditation and receive instruction like any other sincere seeker. The relationship between the two men appeared beautifully balanced. The master treated his distinguished student with neither special deference nor dismissal, and the Prime Minister seemed to approach his teacher with genuine humility and respect. To observers, it appeared that political rank had no bearing on their spiritual connection, simply a wise teacher guiding an earnest student along the path of awakening. On one particular autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted past the temple windows, the Prime Minister settled into his usual position before his master. After their customary meditation, he posed a question that had been troubling him. "Your Reverence," he began with careful formality, "I have been contemplating the nature of spiritual obstacles. Could you please explain what egotism means according to Buddhist teaching?" The transformation in the master's demeanor was startling and immediate. His face flushed deep red, his eyes flashed with apparent anger, and in a voice dripping with condescension and contempt, he snapped back harshly. "What kind of stupid question is that? Have you learned nothing in all your visits here?" The Prime Minister recoiled as if physically struck. Never had his teacher spoken to him with such disrespect. His own face grew hot with indignation. How dare this simple monk, who had never governed provinces or led armies, speak to him in such a manner? Did he not understand to whom he was speaking? The Prime Minister's jaw tightened, his hands clenched, and his entire body bristled with wounded pride and rising fury. Then, just as suddenly as the storm had begun, the Master's expression softened into a gentle smile. His voice returned to its usual warm, patient tone as he said quietly, "This, Your Excellency, is egotism." Buddha's wisdom reminds us the ego is a veil between humans and God. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the subtlety and persistence of our false sense of self. Even when we believe we have cultivated humility, the ego remains, waiting for the right trigger to reveal its hidden presence. Why do we struggle to see our own egotism? Zen Buddhism teaches that the ego is like our own shadow, always present but rarely noticed because we're looking in the wrong direction. The ego is particularly clever at disguising itself in spiritual clothing. We can practice meditation for years, study sacred texts, and even develop genuine compassion, all while maintaining a subtle sense of spiritual superiority or specialness. The Prime Minister's ego wasn't obvious in his daily spiritual practice. He appeared humble, respectful, and sincere. But when his dignity was challenged, when his sense of status and importance was threatened, the ego erupted with full force. This is the ego's signature. It reveals itself not in our calm moments, but in our reactive ones. Consider how often throughout your day you might experience similar moments. A colleague interrupts you during a meeting, and irritation flashes through your mind. A driver cuts you off in traffic, and anger arises. Someone questions your expertise in an area you consider your specialty, and defensiveness emerges. These automatic reactions reveal the ego's constant vigilance, always ready to defend its constructed image of who we think we are. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of working with ego. We must simultaneously accept ourselves completely while remaining willing to see through our self-deceptions. The ego thrives on both self-hatred and self-aggrandizement, but it dissolves in the light of honest, compassionate self-observation. The master's skillful teaching method reveals another crucial insight. Sometimes the most effective spiritual instruction comes not through gentle guidance, but through direct confrontation with our unconscious patterns. The shock of having his dignity challenged in such an unexpected way created a moment of clarity for the Prime Minister. A sudden recognition of patterns that had been operating below the surface of his awareness. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called ego transparency, the ability to see through our self-protective mechanisms as they arise. This doesn't mean we eliminate the ego entirely, which would be neither possible nor desirable, but rather that we develop a lighter relationship with it. We learn to recognize its voice without automatically believing its stories. Tonight, as you notice moments of defensiveness, irritation, or wounded pride arising in your interactions, can you remember the Prime Minister's lesson? Can you see these reactions not as character flaws, but as opportunities for deeper self-understanding? As the Buddha taught, you only lose what you cling to. The ego is simply another thing we cling to, a collection of stories about who we think we are. In releasing our grip on these stories, we discover the freedom that lies beyond the prison of self-importance. Let us now explore a story about the invisible burdens we carry through life. This is the tale of the empty backpack. In a serene monastery garden, where morning dew glistened on carefully tended paths, a young seeker approached his teacher with a question weighing heavily on his heart. His eyes reflected both determination and confusion as he bowed respectfully. "Master," he said, "I wish to understand my path on earth better. Why do I seem to carry my past and relive it again and again? Why can't I get past my past?" The master studied the young man with compassionate eyes, then gestured toward an intricate maze of translucent silk panels shimmering in the garden's filtered sunlight. "Go forward into the maze," he said, reaching for a leather backpack. "But carry this as you walk. It will help you stay focused. Be careful though, as it is quite heavy." The young man accepted the backpack, initially surprised by how easily the master handed it over. But the moment it settled into his grasp, he gasped. The weight was extraordinary, forcing him to bend forward as he struggled toward the maze. Inside the silken labyrinth, he immediately encountered solid walls. Through the translucent material, he could see other seekers navigating their paths like distant ghosts. No matter which direction he turned, every path seemed blocked. Exhausted, he sat down to think. "Others are clearly ahead of me," he thought. "Should I cheat and crawl under the silk?" After wrestling with these thoughts, he chose integrity. As he stood with renewed resolve, an opening magically appeared. Progress felt rewarding until he faced another wall. This time, good intentions yielded no results. The backpack's weight became unbearable, cutting into his shoulders. What could be so heavy yet feel so soft? Overcome with curiosity, he removed the pack and peered inside. It was completely empty. Yet when he lifted it again, the weight remained undeniable. As he placed it back on his shoulders, a voice whispered clearly, "Look inside of you, young man, for the weight lies there." Suddenly, memories flooded his consciousness. His childhood tormentors, accumulated hurts, and resentments carried for years. As he relived each painful experience, the backpack grew heavier. Then understanding dawned. "I am the weight. I carry the burden of that which troubles me." With this insight, he began the work of forgiveness. "I forgive you, wherever you are," he found himself saying. Immediately, the pack lightened and new pathways opened. As sunlight warmed his face, and he remembered moments of love, the weight continued diminishing until the backpack felt weightless. Finally, surrounded by solid silk walls, he sat in meditation. "I am the light and the way. I recognize that I was the impediment, not anyone else." At these words, his feet began rising from the earth. He floated above the maze, seeing how others remained trapped by darkness in their own packs. With a thought, he found himself beside his teacher outside the labyrinth. "Master," he said, his face radiant, "I discovered that my darkness caused my weight, and my lightness freed me to fly." The master smiled knowingly. "What do you feel, young one? Do you feel freed?" Without waiting for an answer, he walked away. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound truth revealed in the empty backpack story. We are the creators of our own burdens. What emerges from this tale is recognition that our past does not imprison us. Our relationship to our past does. The young seeker discovered that suffering came not from what others had done, but from his unwillingness to release those experiences. The empty backpack represents the invisible weight of unprocessed emotions and unhealed wounds we carry through life. Why do we cling so tenaciously to our pain? First is our identification with wounds. We derive identity from grievances, thinking, I am someone who was wronged, rather than, I experienced wronging, but I'm not defined by it. Second is our addiction to the familiar. Even painful emotions become comfortable because they're known. Third is our misunderstanding of forgiveness, believing it means condoning harmful behavior rather than freeing ourselves from resentment's prison. Consider how this plays out daily. The colleague who received credit for your idea still triggers anger. The parent who criticized you decades ago still influences your self-talk. Each is an invisible item in your backpack, weighing you down. Zen teacher Jack Cornfield taught, forgiveness is giving up all hope of having had a different past. We cannot change what happened, but we can change our relationship to what happened. The energy spent maintaining grievances could be redirected toward creating the life we actually want. The floating represents lightness available when we release psychological burdens. This isn't about bypassing pain, but processing experiences fully and choosing freedom over familiarity, growth over grievance. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, what invisible weight might you be carrying? Perhaps it's time to examine what you've been holding on to and ask, does this serve my highest good, or is it time to set it down? As the Buddha taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. The path to freedom begins with radical self-forgiveness and willingness to travel light through life's inevitable challenges. Let us now turn to a tale about the dissolution of identity and the profound questioning that can lead to sudden awakening. This is Whose Child Are You? In the village of Hina lived a woman named Masa, whose life had been shaped by loss and determined by an unwavering commitment to spiritual understanding. After her husband's death left her alone to raise their young son, she could have chosen the conventional path of remarriage or devoted herself entirely to practical survival. Instead, she made a decision that would transform both her life and her understanding of reality itself. Masa became a dedicated student of Zen under the instruction of Master Gadatsu at Muryoji Temple. Her practice was not casual or part-time. She approached it with the intensity of someone who understood that genuine awakening requires complete commitment. Day after day, she worked with her assigned koan, allowing it to penetrate every aspect of her consciousness until it became more present in her awareness than her own thoughts. As her practice deepened, something extraordinary began to happen. Masa generated what Zen practitioners call a great ball of doubt. Not intellectual uncertainty, but a profound questioning that encompasses one's entire sense of reality. This wasn't doubt about specific ideas or concepts, but a fundamental questioning of the very nature of identity, existence, and the boundaries we normally accept without examination. The intensity of her practice became so consuming that the ordinary concerns of daily life began to fade into background awareness. There were days when, completely absorbed in meditation and koan work, she would forget to prepare meals for her family. The kitchen would remain cold and unused while she sat in deep contemplation, wrestling with questions that reached to the very core of existence. One day, when her son returned home from his daily activities, expecting to find his mother engaged in her usual household routines, Masa looked at him with the eyes of someone seeing through the conventional structures of identity and relationship. "Whose child are you?" she inquired. her voice carrying a quality of genuine curiosity rather than maternal recognition. Her son, startled and confused by this strange question from his own mother, responded as any child would. "Mama, what are you saying? What kind of question is that?" But Massa's inquiry had emerged from a place beyond conventional social roles and family relationships. "All right," she replied with obvious satisfaction, as if her son's confused response had confirmed something important. Without further explanation, she returned immediately to her meditation. This peculiar interaction wasn't an isolated incident. For several days, whenever her son appeared, Massa would greet him with the same disorienting question. "Whose child are you?" Each time, the boy would express bewilderment at his mother's behavior, and each time she would respond with the same satisfied, "All right," before returning to her practice. Then suddenly, like lightning illuminating a dark landscape, Massa experienced complete enlightenment. In a single moment of perfect clarity, all the questioning, all the doubt, all the intense practice resolved into direct understanding that transcended every category of knowledge she had previously known. As the Buddha observed, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything, what we think we become. This teaching points us toward understanding how the complete questioning of our assumed identities can lead to the discovery of our essential nature beyond all categories and roles. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound process of spiritual inquiry that goes beyond intellectual questioning to challenge the very foundations of how we understand ourselves and our relationships. Massa's question, "Whose child are you?" wasn't addressed to her son's social identity, but to the deeper mystery of existence itself. Who are any of us, really, beyond the roles and relationships we assume? Her intense koan practice had brought her to the point where conventional identities began to dissolve. Mother, son, family relationships, social roles, all of these suddenly appeared as mental constructs rather than absolute realities. This wasn't a rejection of love or responsibility, but a seeing through the limitations that these categories can place on our understanding of what we essentially are. Why does such complete questioning of identity lead to awakening rather than confusion or despair? Zen Buddhism teaches that our suffering arises largely from our attachment to fixed ideas about who and what we are. When we can question these assumptions thoroughly enough, we discover the boundless awareness that exists prior to all identifications. The great ball of doubt that Massa generated represents one of the most important aspects of authentic spiritual practice. This isn't skepticism or cynicism, but a profound openness that questions everything we think we know about reality, including our most basic assumptions about self and other, inside and outside, existence and non-existence. Her absorption in practice to the point of forgetting daily responsibilities might seem irresponsible, but it actually demonstrates the total commitment required for genuine breakthrough. Half-hearted questioning produces half-hearted insights. Massa's complete dedication created the conditions necessary for fundamental transformation. This story reveals something crucial about the nature of enlightenment. It often comes not through gradual accumulation of knowledge, but through sudden recognition that transcends all previous understanding. The intensive questioning and doubt create the conditions, but the actual awakening happens in a moment of complete clarity that dissolves all questions. We can observe similar patterns of questioning in many areas of personal growth and understanding. The scientist who questions fundamental assumptions about how nature works. The artist who challenges conventional ideas about beauty and expression. The person in relationship who questions what love really means beyond social expectations. The son's confused responses, "Mama, what are you saying?" represent our normal reaction when someone challenges our basic categories of understanding. We typically want to return to familiar ground rather than allowing fundamental assumptions to be questioned. But Masa's "all right" responses suggest that confusion and questioning are exactly the right responses when we're touching something essential. This teaching also points us toward understanding the difference between social identity and essential nature. We spend most of our lives identified with roles: parent, child, professional, citizen. But spiritual awakening reveals the awareness that exists prior to and beyond all these temporary identifications. Zen practice cultivates what might be called identity fluidity, the ability to function within social roles while not being trapped by them. When Masa asked, "Whose child are you?" she was pointing toward the mystery of existence that precedes all our conventional answers about who belongs to whom and how we're related. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that spiritual questioning should be gentle and gradual, but profound transformation often requires the kind of intensive inquiry that challenges everything we think we know. Masa's complete absorption in practice created the pressure necessary for genuine breakthrough. The story also reveals how authentic spiritual seeking affects those around us. Her son was initially confused and perhaps disturbed by his mother's behavior, but he was also witnessing a genuine spiritual transformation that would ultimately benefit their entire family by bringing a realized person into their midst. Beyond this, there emerges a teaching about the courage required for complete spiritual honesty. Most of us maintain comfortable boundaries around our questioning, avoiding inquiries that might threaten our sense of security or familiar identity. Masa was willing to question everything, including the most fundamental assumptions about family and relationship. Tonight, as you consider the various identities and roles that typically define your sense of who you are, can you experiment with the kind of questioning Masa brought to her practice? Who are you beyond your job, your relationships, your history, your plans? What remains when all these temporary identifications are seen as mental constructs rather than absolute realities? The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Through complete questioning of our assumed identities, we discover the essential nature that exists beyond all roles and relationships, not as a rejection of love and connection, but as the foundation from which genuine love and wisdom can finally emerge. Let us now turn to a tale that speaks to the essential quality of humility in spiritual development. This is the story of a father's wisdom and a farmer's profound teaching. In a prosperous household where learning was valued above all else, a wealthy father spared no expense in providing his son with the finest spiritual education available. For years, the young man studied with renowned masters of meditation, learning intricate breathing techniques and advanced philosophical concepts. He practiced yoga with celebrated teachers who could bend their bodies into seemingly impossible positions. He memorized sacred texts and engaged in sophisticated debates about the nature of consciousness and enlightenment. The young man's knowledge grew vast and impressive. He could discourse eloquently about non-duality, explain the subtle differences between various meditation schools, and demonstrate complex spiritual practices with technical precision. Yet despite all this accumulated wisdom, his father noticed something troubling. Beneath his son's spiritual sophistication lay a subtle arrogance, a sense that his education had elevated him above ordinary people and mundane concerns. Recognizing that knowledge without humility could become a spiritual obstacle, the father made an unusual decision. He arranged for his son to visit a dear friend who lived several villages away, a simple farmer who worked the land with his own hands and owned little beyond the tools of his trade. The young man set out reluctantly, puzzled by his father's strange request. What could a mere farmer possibly teach someone who had studied with the greatest masters of the age? What wisdom could emerge from someone whose hands were dirty with soil and whose concerns centered on weather and crops rather than transcendent truths? When he arrived at the modest farmhouse and explained the purpose of his visit, the farmer listened quietly, studying the young man's bearing and manner. Without offering tea or engaging in preliminary conversation, the farmer gave him a single instruction: bow. The young man inclined his head politely, the sort of respectful nod he might offer to acknowledge an elder. But the farmer shook his head and said firmly, "Deeper." Somewhat confused, the young man bent forward at the waist, bringing his head level with his heart in what he considered a proper bow. Still, the farmer was unsatisfied. "Deeper," he commanded. Now the young man bent much lower, his hands nearly touching the ground, his head below his waist. Surely this was sufficient, but again came the farmer's voice: "Bow deeper." Increasingly puzzled, but committed to understanding this strange teaching, the young man dropped to his knees and bowed until his forehead nearly touched the earth. The farmer's response was unchanged. "Deeper." Finally, the young man prostrated himself completely, lying flat on the ground with his arms extended before him, his entire body pressed against the soil. Only then did the farmer smile and say gently, "That's the way to do it. Stand up. You may go. Your education is complete." Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Pride goes before a fall, but humility comes before honor." Here we discover that true spiritual maturity isn't measured by the height of our knowledge, but by the depth of our willingness to be taught. Why do we resist the very humility that makes genuine learning possible? Zen Buddhism explains that the ego constructs its sense of identity through comparison and superiority. The more we accumulate spiritual knowledge, the more tempted we become to use that knowledge as evidence of our advancement, rather than as fuel for deeper inquiry. This spiritual materialism creates an invisible barrier between us and the direct experience that transforms understanding into wisdom. The young man's resistance to bowing deeper reflected his unconscious assumption that his education had earned him a certain status that shouldn't require such extreme gestures. Like many sincere spiritual seekers, he had confused accumulating insights with embodying wisdom. He could explain humility, but couldn't demonstrate it when the situation called for genuine surrender. This struggle reveals itself throughout our spiritual journey. We might meditate regularly, yet become secretly proud of our consistency. We might cultivate compassion, yet feel superior to those we perceive as less caring. We might study non-attachment while remaining attached to our image as spiritual practitioners. The farmer's teaching method was brilliantly designed. Each time the young man thought he had bowed enough, he discovered another layer of his resistance to surrendering completely. The physical act became a mirror for his psychological state. His educated mind kept calculating how much humility was sufficient, rather than simply offering whatever was requested. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron reminds us that humility is not self-deprecation, but rather an accurate assessment of our condition. True humility recognizes both our potential for wisdom and our current limitations without inflating or deflating either reality. The complete prostration that finally satisfied the farmer represents what Zen calls great death. The ego's willingness to dissolve its carefully constructed self-image in service of something larger. This isn't self-humiliation, but self-liberation, freeing ourselves from the exhausting work of maintaining a spiritual persona. Notice how often your spiritual practice might serve unconscious ego needs. Do you meditate to become a meditator, or to discover what's fundamentally true? Do you study wisdom teachings to accumulate knowledge or to be transformed by understanding? Do you serve others to be helpful or to feel helpful? Tonight, as you reflect on the areas where you might carry subtle spiritual pride, can you bow deeper than feels comfortable? Perhaps you'll find that true humility isn't about becoming smaller, but about becoming transparent enough for wisdom to move through you freely. As the Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. This includes working with the conditioned patterns of spiritual ego that can masquerade as genuine development. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about how customs can outlive their purpose. This is the lesson of the monastery cat and the scholars who forgot. In a peaceful monastery nestled in the mountains, a community of monks dedicated themselves to regular meditation practice. Every evening, as the sun set behind the peaks and shadows grew long across the temple grounds, they would gather in the meditation hall for their most important practice session of the day. This was a time of deep silence and inner contemplation that had been maintained for generations. However, the monastery was also home to a particularly vocal cat who had made the temple grounds his territory. This cat had developed the unfortunate habit of appearing during the evening meditation sessions, meowing loudly, knocking over water bowls, and generally creating disturbances that made it difficult for the monks to maintain the focused attention their practice required. Night after night, the monks would attempt to settle into deep meditation, only to be interrupted by the cat's antics. Some tried to ignore the disruptions. Others attempted to gently shoo the animal away, but nothing seemed to work consistently. The cat seemed to have an uncanny ability to choose the most inopportune moments for his loudest and most distracting behavior. Finally, the spiritual teacher who led the community decided that practical action was needed. Rather than allowing the evening practice to continue being disrupted, he instructed his students to gently capture the cat before each meditation session and tie him securely in a corner of the hall where he could do no harm. This simple solution proved effective. The cat, though present, could no longer disturb the monk's concentration. Years passed peacefully with this arrangement. The evening meditation sessions proceeded without interruption. The monks deepened their practice, and the cat seemed content enough with his restrained position during the evening hours. This became the established routine that everyone accepted as normal and necessary. When the old teacher eventually died, the monks naturally continued all the practices he had established, including the evening tying of the cat. After all, this had been part of their master's wisdom, a tradition he had instituted for important spiritual reasons. They didn't question whether the practice was still necessary. It had simply become an integral part of their evening routine. In time, the original cat also died, having lived a full life in the monastery. The monks, now thoroughly convinced that having a tied cat was essential to proper meditation practice, went to great lengths to acquire another cat specifically for this purpose. They searched until they found a suitable replacement, and continued the tradition without interruption. Generations of monks came and went, each learning from their predecessors that tying a cat during evening meditation was a crucial element of their spiritual practice. None questioned why this was necessary. It was simply how things had always been done in their tradition. Centuries later, learned descendants of the spiritual teacher wrote scholarly treatises about the religious significance of tying up a cat for meditation practice. They developed elaborate theories about the symbolic meaning of the restrained cat, its representation of taming the wild mind, and its importance in creating the proper spiritual atmosphere for contemplation. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. This tale unveils how easily practical solutions can transform into meaningless rituals when we stop questioning their original purpose. Why do we continue practices long after their usefulness has ended, simply because they've become traditional? Zen Buddhism emphasizes the importance of understanding the spirit behind forms, rather than blindly following inherited customs that may no longer serve their intended function. The original teacher's decision to tie the cat was purely practical, a simple solution to a specific problem. But over time, this practical measure became ritualized, then sacralized, then analyzed as if it contained profound spiritual meaning that had always been intentional. Consider the various traditions, rules, and customs in your own life, both personal and cultural. How many of these practices do you follow simply because that's how it's always been done, rather than because they serve a current purpose? The monastery's cat represents all the meaningless forms we maintain out of habit rather than wisdom. This teaching applies to spiritual practices, workplace procedures, family traditions, and social customs. Over time, solutions to specific problems can become rigid requirements that persist long after the original problems have disappeared. What began as skillful means becomes empty ritual. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between the finger pointing at the moon and the moon itself, between the forms that serve awakening and awakening itself. The tied cat was never the point. Peaceful meditation was the point. But succeeding generations lost sight of this distinction. The Buddha said, "My teaching is like a raft. It is for crossing over, not for holding onto." The cat-tying tradition represents what happens when we turn temporary rafts into permanent shrines, mistaking the means for the end. Look deeply at the various practices and traditions you maintain. Which ones still serve their original purpose, and which ones have become empty forms you follow out of habit? What would it mean to honor the spirit of these practices while remaining flexible about their forms? The scholars who wrote treatises about the cat's religious significance weren't intentionally creating false doctrine. They genuinely believed they were preserving important wisdom. But their analysis was built on a foundation they didn't understand, leading to elaborate explanations of something that had never been intended as spiritual practice. Tonight, as you consider the various routines, traditions, and practices in your life, can you remember the original cat and the practical problem it solved? Can you distinguish between forms that still serve their purpose and those that have become meaningless repetition? As the Buddha observed, believe nothing merely because you have been told it. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. True spiritual maturity involves continuously examining our practices to ensure they serve their intended purpose, rather than simply preserving forms because they've become familiar. Let us now turn to a tale about the thin boundary between heaven and hell within our own hearts. This is the story of the samurai and the gates. In feudal Japan, a battle-hardened warrior named Nobushige sought out the renowned Zen master Hakuin. The samurai's armor bore the scars of countless conflicts, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen too much violence. He approached the master's simple dwelling with a question that had been burning in his mind since his last campaign. "Master Hakuin," Nobushige said, bowing stiffly in his heavy armor, "I have spent my life fighting for my lord, facing death countless times. Tell me truthfully, is there really a paradise and a hell awaiting us after death?" Hakuin looked up from his tea, studying the warrior with penetrating eyes. "Who are you to ask such a question?" he inquired calmly. "I am a samurai," Nobushige replied with pride, straightening his shoulders. "I serve my lord with honor and have never retreated from battle." Hakuin's expression suddenly shifted to one of disdain. "You, a soldier!" he exclaimed with a dismissive laugh. "What kind of ruler would have you as his guard? Look at yourself. Your face looks like that of a common beggar, weathered and crude. How could someone so lowly claim to be a protector of nobility?" The words struck Nobushige like physical blows. His face flushed red with anger, and his hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword. The insult to his honor was unbearable. "So, you have a sword," Hakuin continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your weapon is probably much too dull to cut off my head. I doubt you could slice through a rice paper screen, let alone defend anyone of importance." Unable to contain his rage any longer, Nobushige began to draw his sword, the steel singing as it emerged from its scabbard. His entire body trembled with fury. His vision narrowed to focus solely on this insolent monk who dared to question his honor. At that precise moment, as the blade caught the afternoon light, Hakuin spoke with sudden clarity. "Here, open the gates of hell!" The words pierced through Nobushige's rage like an arrow finding its target. In that instant, he saw himself clearly, consumed by anger, ready to kill over wounded pride, his mind clouded by fury. He understood that hell was not some distant realm, but the very state he inhabited in that moment. The samurai's hand froze on his sword as recognition dawned across his features. Slowly, with great reverence, Nobushige sheathed his sword and bowed deeply before the master, his anger transformed into profound gratitude. "Here open the gates of paradise," Hakuin said gently, his voice now filled with compassion. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is a startling revelation about the geography of our inner world. Heaven and hell are not distant destinations, but present moment experiences we create through the quality of our consciousness. Why do we so easily find ourselves at the gates of hell? Zen Buddhism points to the three poisons that cloud our minds: greed, hatred, and delusion. When Nobushige's pride was wounded, hatred arose instantly, transforming a peaceful afternoon into a realm of suffering. His entire reality shifted from curiosity about the afterlife to murderous rage in mere moments. The deeper teaching here shows us that we carry within ourselves the capacity for both states. Paradise and hell are not places we go to after death. They are experiences we inhabit while living. Each moment offers us the choice between the hell of reactivity and the paradise of awareness. Consider how often throughout your day similar transformations occur. A critical email arrives, and suddenly your peaceful morning becomes a realm of anxiety and resentment. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and the spaciousness of your drive contracts into a tight knot of irritation. A thoughtless comment from a colleague, and your contentment dissolves into hurt feelings and defensive thoughts. In Zen practice, we cultivate the capacity to recognize these moments of transition. Like Nobushige drawing his sword, we learn to catch ourselves at the very moment we're about to enter hell through our reactions. This recognition itself becomes the key that opens the gates of paradise. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When we're caught in reactivity, we're rejecting the present moment, the master's teaching, the opportunity for awakening in favor of our thoughts about how things should be. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Hakuin's apparent insults were not cruelty but compassion in disguise. By provoking Nobushige's anger so skillfully, he showed the warrior exactly what he needed to see. That hell is a state of mind we enter through our own choices. This teaching invites us to examine our own triggers. What words or situations instantly transport us to hell? Perhaps it's feeling unappreciated at work, being misunderstood by family, or facing unexpected challenges. Each of these experiences offers the same choice Nobushige faced. Will we draw our sword or recognize the teaching? Tonight, as you notice irritation arising in response to some frustration, can you remember Hakuin's lesson? Can you recognize the moment when you're about to enter hell through your reactions and instead choose the paradise of awareness? As the Buddha taught, what we think, we become. In each moment, we are either opening the gates of hell through unconscious reactivity or opening the gates of paradise through mindful presence. Tonight, as we gently conclude our time together, can you feel how the calm you've discovered isn't something you need to chase or create, but rather something that naturally emerges when you simply allow it? Can you notice that the deep quiet you've touched during these stories doesn't live only in ancient teachings, but rests quietly within your own awareness, always available when you remember to look? The Buddha once said, "Three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth." As you reflect on this wisdom, remember that the clarity and peace you've experienced tonight aren't temporary gifts that will fade with morning, but enduring truths about your own nature that become visible when the noise of daily life finally settles. Through each story we've shared, you've encountered the same essential understanding expressed in different ways. That struggle diminishes when we stop fighting what we cannot change. That freedom naturally unfolds when we release our desperate need to control, and that genuine tranquility arises from simply observing life without getting caught in endless reactions. Even when your thoughts return tomorrow, even when stress tries to reclaim your attention, the insights you've received tonight have taken root in the depths of your mind, creating a foundation of understanding that will quietly support you in moments when you need it most. Notice, as you prepare for sleep, that these timeless teachings haven't revealed some complicated formula for happiness, but rather the simple art of being fully present to whatever this moment offers. In the stillness that surrounds you now, feel how naturally your breathing has deepened, how easily your body has relaxed, and how peacefully your mind has settled into this gentle rhythm of rest. These ancient stories remind us that profound wisdom doesn't require years of study or special circumstances to access. It reveals itself naturally in the quiet moments when we pause our rushing and simply pay attention to what's already here. Tonight, you've tasted that truth, a truth that becomes clear whenever we stop long enough to notice. As you transition from this peaceful state into tomorrow's activities, take with you not just the memory of these teachings, but the deep sense of calm and understanding they've awakened in you. May this inner quiet remain your constant companion, guiding you through whatever challenges and joys await. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk.